Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Mace. I'm coming to you from Canada in North America. You know that. I had to just add that on there. I'm in North America. If you didn't know, hey Canada, what continent are you in? Why Europe doesn't build skyscrapers? Let's check it out. Yeah, that's interesting. That was always like a wondrous sort of thing when you were little. I think when you went to the big city and you went to the downtown centers and you're looking up at all the buildings, right? You're looking up at all the buildings and you're saying, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, skyscrapers are kind of cool, but also kind of a North American thing, probably. I assume Europe doesn't have as many because of aesthetics and also just the historical architecture would kind of make a strange contrast depending on the city, I suppose. But I think it will have to do with aesthetics of the city, sight lines, and preservation of historical architecture, and yeah, let's see.
Aren't there many skyscrapers in Europe? Despite being one of the most developed, densely populated, and economically prosperous continents, Europe has surprisingly few skyscrapers, particularly when compared to Asia and North America.
Is that King's Landing?
Of the 218 skyscrapers constructed on the continent to date, 66% of them are located in just 5 cities: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Moscow, and Istanbul.
Okay.
So why have other major European cities
Berlin.
not embraced the skyscraper? How do they thrive without the significant
Amsterdam.
inner urban space and floor areas that these clever structures provide? And is everything about to change in our increasingly urbanized world? When skyscrapers first rose to prominence in the 19th century, first in Chicago and later in New York, many European cities were already firmly established, with grand historic buildings and public spaces that left little room for
I certainly feel like, and look at this photo of France, so beautiful. Photo of Paris. Yeah, New York is your like prototype for downtown area with lots of skyscrapers.
Large new structures. Most of Europe's cities around that time were also more evenly zoned and were not facing the high demand for floor space in key districts that typically drives high-rise development. Additionally, as the power and influence of North America began to grow, a cultural rivalry emerged between Americans who saw Europe's class system as outdated and Europeans who saw some American ideals as eroding traditions and the European way of life. As a result, each continent became wary of adopting the other's concepts. While North America aimed to become the model for a new age, Europe sought to preserve its heritage. While this explains why skyscraper construction didn't initially catch on in Europe, it doesn't explain what has held the continent back since.
Right.
In the wake of the Second World War,
There's a lot of rebuilding to do after World War II. A lot of bombs were dropped. A lot of historical sites destroyed. Crazy, really. So the Americans didn't need to go through that.
many thought European cities would modernize and replicate the skyscrapers that were rising across North America.
Nope. And they rebuilt.
However, in Western Europe, where many cities lost landmark and historic structures, an overwhelming desire to restore what had been destroyed took hold.
Of course.
In addition, the lower population
the buildings
of
are
Europe at that
beautiful.
time meant that the demand for floor area that principally drives skyscraper construction wasn't there. As a result, modest structures replaced buildings that could not be saved or restored. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the expanding Soviet
It's so obviously Eastern Europe, when we cut to that, just the apartments and stuff.
Union's rebuild effort consisted largely of mid-rise repetitive structures
Yeah.
that sought to rehouse much
Utilitarian.
of the population. It was during this time that Europe saw its first skyscrapers begin to rise, not in response to growth and prosperity, but in an effort by the Soviets to indicate their power and influence. While Brussels has never constructed a true skyscraper, it is partly responsible for the lack of skyscrapers across the continent. Without any significant zoning regulations in place, the 1960s saw many buildings in the city.
So the Americans are like an insecure dude in a dick measuring contest. It's like, look at all my skyscrapers are taller than yours.
Demolished to make way for large modern structures that had little regard for architectural or cultural value. Recognizing the damage this indiscriminate redevelopment was doing to the city, many prominent figures and architects coined the term Brusselization and lobbied to introduce new planning laws. These regulations significantly limited the scale of new buildings and required historic facades to be restored and incorporated into new developments, preserving the cultural fabric of the city. The row in Brussels led to a general dislike for modern buildings across Europe, with many seeing them as bland or soulless. In response, numerous cities adopted similar regulations and set aside controlled districts, like Paris's La Défense, to keep high-rise development away from historic centres. By the start of the 21st century, attitudes around tall buildings were softening across the continent, as architectural trends moved away from box-like structures towards more unique designs, and as the world became increasingly...
Look at that. Interesting structure right there. I don't know what type of architecture that would be called. I wouldn't say it's brutalist, but it has like a certain blocky nature to it.
Globalized. Since the early 2000s, major financial centres like London, Paris, Moscow, Istanbul and Frankfurt have seen several skyscrapers rise, as demand for commercial space in their centres has increased. By contrast, smaller European cities that have been experiencing more modest growth have turned their focus to the environment and
These buildings are so cool. Where is that anyways? I feel like I've seen these before. It's in Milan. That's so cool.
Improving living standards for citizens. In recent years, urban areas in Scandinavia and Central Europe have consistently ranked among the highest in the world for sustainability, happiness and well-being, while maintaining importance within their national economies. However, skyscraper construction in the cities of today is no longer driven purely by economic growth or the need for commercial office space. With 60% of the global human population set to be living in urban areas by 2030, residential skyscrapers are now rising in prominence, particularly across Asia and North America.
Yeah, I think still the statistics are pointing to, just like he said, 60% of the world population living in urban areas by 2030. So that's a huge amount. Let's say there's 8 billion. That's a lot. A lot of people living in urban areas. I don't live in an urban area anymore. I used to live in Vancouver, but I moved away. We moved away because we had had enough with city life, I guess you could say. And I haven't got a chance to get out there and like in the world and live in different big cities around the world. And of course I wish I could, but there's a certain comfortability. I kind of have everything I need within my space, so it works. Good group of friends, good access to nature, good access to all the recreational activities I want to do, very reasonable prices on houses and etc. I prefer the small town. I don't like traffic. I don't like tons of people. So I'm becoming more cynical, I suppose, and just want a sort of peaceful existence for the most part.
As many traditional rural-based industries become automated, millions are migrating into cities and major urban areas, driving significant demand for residential space
Melbourne.
that is often met with high-rise structures. Europe is not immune to this phenomenon, particularly in such a heavily globalised world, and with the continent's desire to keep up with the progress and economic growth of China and the US.
What city is this? Did it say? I don't think it said. Oh, that's
As such,
London.
Europe could witness a skyscraper boom in the decades ahead. However, with entire urban centres now being declared historically significant, and with the desire to retain as much culture and architecture as possible rightly holding strong up to the present day, the unique challenge facing future skyscraper construction in Europe is all to do with the past.
Like, that's incredible. This in Barcelona. That's beautiful. Why would you ever even consider changing some of this stuff? You got this beautiful park right beside it.
If you enjoyed this video and would like to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, subscribe to the B1M.
Super cool. Interesting stuff when you look at it through the lens of the video creator and why those differences exist. Sort of post-war and American, what would you call it? Like, we're going to show the world that this is the new age and we're building huge buildings everywhere. North America didn't have as much beautiful architecture around. Like Western North America, like Western Canada, Western US, it's all like brand new, right? We only got out there, or people only got out there settling in like 19th century, right? So, I mean, in any sort of meaningful way, it wasn't until the 20th century that it started being developed. So there's going to be a huge lack of historical architecture, which Europe has in abundance. Hundreds and hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years of architecture. Of course, a lot of buildings get eroded. A lot of buildings got destroyed in World War I and II. But it's interesting. He kind of paints a picture that tides are maybe changing a little bit. However, Europe is also holding strong on keeping that historical aesthetic and historical buildings in place to keep a measure of to retain a measure of the culture of the city, instead of how some of the buildings were described in the video as bland and soulless, right? Like modern buildings, which can often be they're built practically and they're built to be cheap, and they're not necessarily built to be beautiful. So architecture is a pretty fascinating subject, really. All right, we'll see you all soon. Make sure to leave a comment down below for the algorithm. I'll appreciate it, and peace out.